We're at the point now where the fretboard has been radiused with a lovely compound radius of 12 inches at the nut to 20 inches at the 24th fret. Now we are ready to cut the fret slots, or at least mark them out. The issue being that this is a 650mm scale, which is a classical scale length, instead of the standard 648 or 647.7mm, which is a Fender scale. Predominantly a Fender scale, shall we say. This means that I can't use my fret slotting machine because I don't have a jig for a 650mm scale, and I'm going to be cutting them by hand. But that means that you will be watching me cut them by hand, which is always good. Let's move on. And the first thing you do is draw a center line. The second thing you do, and the third, is double check and triple check that it is actually centered. Alright, now in the past I used a book with a list of the frets positions, and I just used a standard ruler, 35.67, 72, etc, 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 all the way along, and mark them out that way. I've now bought some of these rulers from Stu Mac, which are pretty good. They come pre-marked with the fret positions and are nice and accurate, as one would expect. So you can either place that down the center line and mark out each fret position, and then use this piece of engineering beauty to mark out and make sure that they are horizontal to the center line. Or if you think it makes more sense, you can mark down one side and then down the other and join the lines. So I'm going to mark down the center line, and in order to make sure that this is absolutely accurate, I'm going to tape that down. Sharp pencil. Needless to say, this is absolutely essential. Now, I'm certain that those are in the correct place, and it is time to use my protractor to mark them out perfectly horizontal to the center line. And this is where the center line is, well, absolutely essential. If this is off, everything else will be off. And again, at the end of this, I will go through and double check and make sure that all of the measurements are spot on. And they are. Now, marking out fret slots and cutting them by hand is something of a lost art. I've got them marked. I've double and triple checked that they're all square and in the correct position. Now cutting them is going to take, as you'll see in a second, several saws. If you are not absolutely certain that using a saw you can keep it square to your mark, then sometimes it's a good idea to use a scalpel blade to score along. Again, make absolutely certain it's in the right place, and then just score a couple of lines. Now what that's done is that's created a notch where the fret needs to be, and it makes it easier to accurately, and of course accuracy is the name of the game here, it makes it easier to accurately cut a straight line like that. So if you are at all worried, that is the method that you should use. Now, obviously we're about to cut these fret slots, and that takes practice and skill. I remember doing my first ever one on a very rickety kitchen table, and it was, well, not quite successful, shall we say. I have a lovely old saw here, Spear & Jackson, if that makes any difference, and this is what I make my initial cut with. Basically this marks out, much as we did with the scalpel blade just now, this will mark the line that I will then follow later on. In order to make sure that this is perfectly square, I have glued a little file that is nice and flat on. It was as you probably know if you watch my videos, I don't much like these concave fret profiling files. I rather do it with one that I make myself, and that has ended up being there. Yes, I could probably use it. I could probably sell it, inflict that type of file on somebody else. However, I now have a nice straight saw blade, and that makes just the first initial cut. What's the difference between first and initial? I don't know. Now, my final cut is a little Japanese saw. This beauty just happens to be the right width for my fret tangs, and it is wonderful. In order to make sure I go to the right depth, I put masking tape down the side and only cut to the depth that the masking tape allows me to. You don't need any of these big chunky bits of steel on the side which just tend to get in the way, and that's what you find on commercially available fretting saws. But this works perfectly fine, and this follows the initial cut that we make with the standard saw. So yes. Now that the neck is clamped to my bench properly, I can make my initial cuts. And these are more of a dent than anything. And now we can move on to the little Japanese saw. Pull some masking tape out. And stick that so that only the amount of saw blade that I want to cut is showing. That's slightly deeper than a standard fret. And just for an example, this saw now quite happily sits in that slot that we've already cut. You do still have to be careful, of course. But it's much easier to cut an accurate fret slot now. And that is obviously the fret slot that the bottom of which matches the radius of the fretboard quite nicely. It's really rather important to have good light and know exactly what you're doing when you are cutting fret slots. And of course you have to keep your saw as perfectly square to the fretboard as you possibly can. Initial cut with the standard saw, followed by a now slightly blunt Japanese saw. So the end result is a perfectly cut ebony fretboard, ready for binding, ready for inlays. And well, you're going to have to watch the next video to see what happens next. Thanks for watching.